Bonjour, mes amis. Welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager of the PB Library. Thank you for joining me for day 51 of our read along together of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This actually marks the beginning of the penultimate week of our read along together. We're going to finish this in 2 more weeks. So we've just got 2 full weeks of reading left to go. And what that means also, in addition to that, we are getting the conclusion of an amazing, rich tapestried book. But also this time to start thinking of what you'd like to read next. So please go ahead and I'll create a second post that'll show up shortly after this starts on Monday afternoon. And you can go ahead and start nominating the titles that you would like to read next. What we'll do is we'll select on the following Monday what book we're going to read next. So go ahead and start nominating what it is that you're interested in reading next. Just remember, it needs to be something from the public domain. So that means an older title that's out of copyright. Okay, so today we're reading together on Monday, the 7th of September. Okay, clearly I'm still in Friday clothes, and I still have the same tea that I was drinking on Friday afternoon because it's Labor Day. So I am enjoying a day off. I hope the rest of you are also enjoying a wonderful holiday, and that you're doing something special this weekend. I'm going to start off my weekend with a lovely glass of berry blossom tea. Much easier to sip since it's about an hour cooler than it was when I first brewed it. And I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about what chapters we read together on Friday. We read 2 chapters on Friday. Chapter 93 was entitled Valentin, and it began with Monsieur Morel coming to visit Valentin after the duel that did not happen between Albert de Morcerf and the Count of Monte Cristo. And he's sitting with Valentin and her grandfather when Valentin is called, and she mentions that she hasn't been feeling well lately. And one of the things that her grandfather, Monsieur Noirtier, has been doing to help her is he's been giving her some of his medicine to help her, prevent her from getting any more ill. And she actually points out that the medicine seems to be quite strong because sometimes the flavor of the medicine lingers even when she's drinking other things during the course of the day. So, all right, we read yesterday, so we already know what happened. I mean, clearly she's being poisoned, and the poison that okay, we'll get to it. But so she then is called away to visit with her mother-in-law, or her stepmother, excuse me, because the Danglars women, Baroness Danglars and her daughter Eugenie Danglars, are come by to announce the engagement of Andrea Cavalcanti to Eugenie Danglars, and they're going to be a party in 3 more days, and so the Villaforts have been invited. While Valentine Villefort is there, she starts feeling a little ill, and they excuse her to go because they just say they can tell she's not feeling well. When she leaves the room, she goes to visit her grandfather, and before she can arrive at her grandfather's room, she has a fit, and she stumbles, and she falls down the last 3 steps of the stairs. They bring her in, and she tries to blow it off, like, oh, I'm fine, don't worry about me. And then she has another attack. And so that's when we get to the next chapter, chapter 94, Maximilian's avowal. In that one, Maximilian and the grandfather, they basically look at her and they realize she needs help. She needs real help. And so they call for assistance. The servants come. Maximilian hides in the closet momentarily when her father arrives, and her father says, we need a doctor. We need Dr. d'Avrigny. Mind you, Dr. d'Avrigny is the man who'd said before he was no longer going to help them because he was pretty sure somebody in the Villefort house was a poisoner, and he was pretty sure also that it was Valentin, so he wanted nothing more to do with it if Villefort was not going to prosecute this as a crime. But Villefort says, I'm going to go get Dr. d'Avrigny right now. And so he goes out to do that. He leaves, he talks to the doctor, and he says, he basically convinces the doctor that Valentin is the one being murdered now. Clearly, there's something going on. He will act on it this time, but he needs to save his daughter. Please come help his daughter. And so the doctor goes back with Villefort. Meanwhile, when Villefort left to go get the doctor, Morel ran out of the room, the other door, and he went to go visit the Count of Monte Cristo because he remembered that shortly after the duel that didn't happen, the Count of Monte Cristo had told Maximilian Morel if there was anything he needed to come to him, that he would do his best to assist. And now Maximilian Morel needs help. So he goes to the Count of Monte Cristo, and he basically says, like, hypothetically, what if you had overheard a conversation between 2 people talking about murders, like poisonings happening in a house, and what if you thought that it was happening again? What would you do? And the Count of Monte Cristo says, it doesn't concern you. You should leave it be. And the Maximilian says, but you don't understand. It's starting again. Somebody else is about to be poisoned, I'm pretty sure. And again, the Count of Monte Cristo says, it doesn't concern you. If God has brought this punishment down on that house, who are you to step in and stop it? And who am I? That's their just rewards. That's their just deserts. Leave it be. And when Maximilian Morel can't control his emotions anymore, and he says, but I love her. And he reveals to the Count of Monte Cristo that Maximilian is in love with Valentin de Villefort, who is the one who he suspects of being poisoned. With this, the Count of Monte Cristo realizes that he cannot just watch it happen. He cannot just stand aside, because he cares for Maximilian Morel. He cares for the Morel family very deeply, and he cannot let Maximilian's heart be broken in order, even though Valentin de Villefort is the daughter of the man who allowed him to be thrown into the Chateau d'If despite knowing that Edmond Dantes was innocent. So now the Count of Monte Cristo, who has contributed, perhaps, let's say, to this rash of poisoning in the Villefort house, now must stop it and to save Valentin de Villefort. So basically what ends up, the last bit of the chapter is that the doctor shows up back at the Villefort house. He speaks with Monsieur de Noirtier, and he comes to understand that Monsieur de Noirtier had realized that there was a poisoning going on, that was using the poison that he had been taking as a medicine, which is why he had not been killed when Barrois drank the lemonade. And so in order to prevent Valentine from suffering the same fate as Barrois, he has been giving her some of his medicine little by little and increasing the dosage so that she would build up a tolerance to the poison being given. And that was why Valentine was tasting bitterness in her drinks, even outside of when she was taking the medicine, because that poison has been slipped to her on several occasions. So exciting. So the doctor is aware that Noirtier has saved her at this point, but they don't know what's going to come next. So the doctor is ready to try to save her and to investigate what's going on. Meanwhile, while the doctor goes up to attend to Valentine, a mysterious Italian priest, the Abbé Busoni, moves into the house next door to the Villefort mansion. And so we know now that the Abbé Busoni is the Count of Monte Cristo. So this is somehow part of his plan to save Valentine and to protect the love of Maximilian Morel. Okay. Whew, a lot of excitement happened at the end of the week. Let's go ahead and see what we find in these two chapters, chapters 95 and 96. I do also want to point out chapter 95 is entitled Father and Daughter. We already had two father and son chapters. We had the father and son that was first old Dantes and Edmond Dantes. We had another father and son chapter of Monsieur Noirtier and Monsieur de Villefort. And now we have a father and daughter chapter. So let's see who this pertains to. Chapter 95 of the Count of Monte Cristo, Father and Daughter. We saw in a preceding chapter how Madame Danglars went formally to announce to Madame de Villefort the approaching marriage of Eugénie Danglars and Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti. This formal announcement, which implied or appeared to imply the approval of all the persons concerned in this momentous affair, had been preceded by a scene to which our readers must be admitted. We beg them to take one step backward and to transport themselves, the morning of the day of great catastrophes, into the showy, gilded salon we have before shown them, and which was the pride of its owner, Baron Danglars. In this room, at about 10 o'clock in the morning, the banker himself had been walking to and fro for some minutes thoughtfully and in evident uneasiness, watching both doors and listening to every sound. When his patience was exhausted, he called his valet. "Etienne," said he, "see why Mademoiselle Eugénie has called me to meet her in the drawing-room, and why she makes me wait so long." Having given this vent to his ill humor, the Baron became more calm. Mademoiselle Danglars had that morning requested an interview with her father, and had fixed on the gilded drawing-room as the spot. The singularity of this step, and above all its formality, had not a little surprised the banker, who had immediately obeyed his daughter by repairing first to the drawing-room. Etienne soon returned from his errand. "Mademoiselle's lady's maid says, sir, that Mademoiselle is finishing her toilette and will be here shortly." Danglars nodded to signify that he was satisfied. To the world and to his servants, Danglars assumed the character of the good-natured man and the indulgent father. This was one of his parts in the popular comedy he was performing. a make-up he had adopted and which suited him about as well as the masks worn on the classic stage by paternal actors, who seen from one side were the image of geniality, and from the other showed lips drawn down in chronic ill temper. Let us hasten to say that in private the genial side descended to the level of the other, so that generally the indulgent man disappeared to give place to the brutal husband and domineering father. Why the devil does that foolish girl who pretends to wish to speak to me not come into my study? And why on earth does she want to speak to me at all? He was turning this thought over in his brain for the 20th time when the door opened and Eugenie appeared, attired in a figured black satin dress, her hair dressed and gloves on, as if she were going to the Italian opera. Well, Eugenie, what is it you want with me, and why in this solemn drawing-room when the study is so comfortable? I quite understand why you ask, sir, said Eugenie, making a sign that her father might be seated. And in fact, your two questions suggest fully the theme of our conversation. I will answer them both, and contrary to the usual method, the last first, because it is the least difficult. I have chosen the drawing-room, sir, as our place of meeting, in order to avoid the disagreeable impressions and influences of a banker's study. Those gilded cash books, drawers locked like gates of fortresses, heaps of bank bills, come from I know not where, and the quantities of letters from England, Holland, Spain, India, China, and Peru have generally a strange influence on a father's mind, and make him forget that there is in the world an interest greater and more sacred than the good opinion of his correspondents. I have therefore chosen this drawing-room, where you see, happy and smiling and happy in their magnificent frames, your portrait, mine, my mother's, and all sorts of rural landscapes and touching pastorals. I rely much on external impressions. Perhaps, with regard to you, they are immaterial, but I should be no artist if I had not some fancies. Very well, replied Monsieur Danglars, who had listened to all this preamble with imperturbable coolness, but without understanding a word, since, like every man burdened with thoughts of the past, he was occupied with seeking the thread of his own ideas in those of the speaker. There is, then, the second point cleared up, or nearly so, said Eugenie, without the least confusion, and with that masculine pointedness which distinguished her gesture and her language. And you appear satisfied with the explanation. Now, let us return to the first. You ask me why I have requested this interview. I will tell you in 2 words, sir. I will not marry Andrea Cavalcanti. Danglars leapt from his chair and raised his eyes and arms towards heaven. Yes, indeed, sir, continued Eugenie, still quite calm. You are astonished, I see, for since this little affair began I have not manifested the slightest opposition, and yet I am always sure, when the opportunity arises, to oppose a determined and absolute will to people who have not consulted me, and things which displease me. However, this time my tranquillity, or passiveness, as philosophers say, proceeded from another source. It proceeded from a wish, like a submissive and devoted daughter, a slight smile was observable on the purple lips of the young girl, to practice obedience. Well? asked Danglars. Well, sir, replied Eugenie, I have tried to the very last, and now that the moment has come, I feel in spite of all my efforts that it is impossible. But, said Danglars, whose weak mind was at first quite overwhelmed with the weight of this pitiless logic, marking evident premeditation and force of will, what is your reason for this refusal, Eugenie? What reason do you assign? My reason, replied the young girl. Well, it is not that the man is more ugly, more foolish, or more disagreeable than any other. No, Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti may appear to those who look at men's faces and figures as a very good specimen of his kind. It is not either that my heart is less touched by him than any other. That would be a schoolgirl's reason, which I consider quite beneath me. I actually love no one, sir. You know it, do you not? I do not then see why, without real necessity, I should encumber my life with a perpetual companion. Has not some sage said, nothing too much? And another, I carry all my effects with me? I have been taught these 2 aphorisms in Latin and in Greek. One is, I believe, from Phaedrus, and the other from Bias. Well, my dear father, in the shipwreck of life, for life is an eternal shipwreck of our hopes, I cast into the sea my useless encumbrance, that is all, and I remain with my own will, disposed to live perfectly alone, and consequently perfectly free. Unhappy girl, murmured Danglars, turning pale, for he knew from long experience the solidity of the obstacle he had so suddenly encountered. Unhappy girl, replied Eugenie. Unhappy girl, do you say, sir? No, indeed. The exclamation appears quite theatrical and affected. Happy, on the contrary, for what am I in want of? The world calls me beautiful. It is something to be well received. I like a favorable reception. It expands the countenance, and those around me do not then appear so ugly. I possess a share of wit and a certain relative sensibility, which enables me to draw from life in general, for the support of mine, all I meet with that is good, like the monkey who cracks the nut to get at its contents. I am rich, for you have one of the first fortunes in France. I am your only daughter, and you are not so exacting as the fathers of the Porte Saint Martin and Gaité, who disinherit their daughters for not giving them grandchildren. Besides, the provident law has deprived you of the power to disinherit me, at least entirely, as it has also of the power to compel me to marry Monsieur this or Monsieur that. And so, being beautiful, witty, somewhat talented, as the comic operas say, and rich, and that is happiness, sir. Why do you call me unhappy? Danglars, seeing his daughter smiling, and proud even to insolence, could not entirely repress his brutal feelings, but they betrayed themselves only by an exclamation. Under the fixed and inquiring gaze leveled at him from under those beautiful black eyebrows, he prudently turned away and calmed himself immediately, daunted by the power of a resolute mind. Truly, my daughter, replied he with a smile, you are all you boast of being, excepting one thing. I will not too hastily tell you which, but would rather leave you to guess it. Eugenie looked at Danglars, much surprised that one flower of her crown of pride, with which she had so superbly decked herself, should be disputed. My daughter, continued the banker, you have perfectly explained to me the sentiments which influence a girl like you, who is determined she will not marry. Now it remains for me to tell you the motives of a father like me, who has decided that his daughter shall marry. Eugenie bowed, not as a submissive daughter, but as an adversary prepared for a discussion. My daughter, continued Danglars, when a father asks his daughter to choose a husband, he has always some reason for wishing her to marry. Some are affected with the mania of which you spoke just now, that of living again in their grandchildren. That is not my weakness, I tell you at once. Family joys have no charm for me. I may acknowledge this to a daughter whom I know to be philosophical enough to understand my indifference, and not to impute it to me as a crime. This is not to the purpose, said Eugenie. Let us speak candidly, sir. I admire candor. Oh, said Danglars, I can, when circumstances render it desirable, adopt your system, although it may not be my general practice. I will therefore proceed. I have proposed to you to marry, not for your sake, for indeed I did not think of you in the least at the moment. You admire candor, and will now be satisfied, I hope, but because it suited me to marry you as soon as possible on account of certain commercial speculations I am desirous of entering into. Eugenie became uneasy. It is just as I tell you, I assure you, and you must not be angry with me, for you have sought this disclosure. I do not willingly enter into arithmetical explanations with an artist like you, who fears to enter my study lest she should imbibe disagreeable or anti-poetic impressions and sensations. But in that same banker's study, where you very willingly presented yourself yesterday to ask for the 1,000 francs I give you monthly for pocket money, you must know, my dear young lady, that many things may be learned, useful even to a girl who will not marry. There one may learn, for instance, what, out of regard to your nervous susceptibility, I will inform you of in the drawing-room, namely, that the credit of a banker is his physical and moral life. That credit sustains him as breath animates the body, and Monsieur de Monte Cristo once gave me a lecture on that subject, which I have never forgotten. There we may learn that as credit sinks, the body becomes a corpse, and this is what must happen very soon to the banker who is proud to own so good a logician as you for his daughter. But Eugenie, instead of stooping, drew herself up under the blow. Ruined? Said she. Exactly, my daughter. That is precisely what I mean, said Danglars, almost digging his nails into his breast, while he preserved on the harsh features the smile of the heartless though clever man. Ruined. Yes, that is it. Ah, said Eugenie. Yes, ruined. Now it is revealed, this secret so full of horror, as the tragic poet says. Now, my daughter, learn from my lips how you may alleviate this misfortune, so far as it will affect you. Oh, cried Eugenie, you are a bad physiognomist if you imagine I deplore on my own account the catastrophe of which you warn me. I ruined? And what will that signify to me? Have I not my talent left? Can I not, like Pasta, Malibran, Grisi, acquire for myself what you would never have given me, whatever might have been your fortune, 100 or 150,000 livres per annum, for which I shall be indebted to no one but myself, and which, instead of being given as you gave those poor 12,000 francs, with sour looks and reproaches for my prodigality, will be accompanied with acclamations, with bravos, and with flowers. And if I do not possess that talent, which your smiles prove to me you doubt, should I not still have that ardent love of independence, which will be a substitute for wealth, and which in my mind supersedes even the instinct of self-preservation? No, I grieve not on my account. I shall always find a resource. My books, my pencils, my piano, all the things which cost but little, and which I shall be able to procure, will remain my own. Do you think that I sorrow for Madame Danglars? Undeceive yourself again. Either I am greatly mistaken, or she is provided against the catastrophe which threatens you, and which will pass over without affecting her. She has taken care for herself, at least I hope so, for her attention has not been diverted from her projects by watching over me. She has fostered my independence by professedly indulging my love for liberty. Oh no, sir, from my childhood I have seen too much and understood too much of what has passed around me, for misfortune to have an undue power over me. From my earliest recollections, I have been beloved by no one. So much the worse. That has naturally led me to love no one. So much the better. Now you have my profession of faith. Then, said Danglars, pale with anger, which was not at all due to offended paternal love, then, mademoiselle, you persist in your determination to accelerate my ruin? Your ruin! I accelerate your ruin! What do you mean? I do not understand you. So much the better. I have a ray of hope left. Listen. I am all attention, said Eugenie, looking so earnestly at her father that it was an effort for the latter to endure her unrelenting gaze. Monsieur Cavalcanti, continued Danglars, is about to marry you, and will place in my hands his fortune, amounting to 3,000,000 livres. That is admirable, said Eugenie, with sovereign contempt, smoothing her gloves out one upon the other. You think I shall deprive you of those 3 millions, said Danglars, but do not fear it. They are destined to produce at least 10. I and a brother banker have obtained a grant of a railway, the only industrial enterprise which in these days promises to make good the fabulous prospects that law once held out to the eternally deluded Parisians in the fantastic Mississippi scheme. As I look at it, a millionth part of a railway is worth fully as much as an acre of waste land on the banks of the Ohio. We make in our case a deposit on a mortgage which is an advance, as you see, since we gain at least 10, 15, 20, or 100 livres worth of iron in exchange for our money. Well, within a week I am to deposit 4 millions for my share. The 4 millions, I promise you, will produce 10 or 12. But during my visit to you the day before yesterday, sir, which you appeared to recollect so well, replied Eugenie, I saw you arranging a deposit, is not that the term, of 5 millions and a half. You even pointed it out to me in 2 drafts on the treasury, and you were astonished that so valuable a paper did not dazzle my eyes like lightning. Yes, but those 5.5 millions are not mine, and are only a proof of the great confidence placed in me. My title of popular banker has given me the confidence of charitable institutions, and the 5.5 millions belong to them. At any other time I should not have hesitated to make use of them, but the great losses I have recently sustained are well known, and as I told you, my credit is rather shaken. That deposit may be at any moment withdrawn, and if I had employed it for another purpose, I should bring on me a disgraceful bankruptcy. I do not despise bankruptcies, believe me, but they must be those which enrich, not those which ruin. Now, if you marry Monsieur Cavalcanti and I get the 3 millions, or even if it is thought I am going to get them, my credit will be restored, and my fortune, which for the last month or 2 has been swallowed up in gulfs which have been opened in my path by an inconceivable fatality, will revive. Do you understand me? Perfectly. You pledge me for 3 millions, do you not? The greater the amount, the more flattering it is to you. It gives you an idea of your value. Thank you. One word more, sir. Do you promise me to make what use you can of the report of the fortune Monsieur Cavalcanti will bring without touching the money? This is no act of selfishness, but of delicacy. I am willing to help rebuild your fortune, but I will not be an accomplice in the ruin of others. But since I tell you, cried Danglars, that with these 3 million, do you expect to recover your position, sir, without touching those 3 million? I hope so, if the marriage should take place and confirm my credit. Shall you be able to pay Monsieur Cavalcanti the 500,000 francs you promised for my dowry? He shall receive them on returning from the mayor's. Very well. What next? What more do you want? I wish to know if, in demanding my signature, you leave me entirely free in my person? Absolutely. Then, as I said before, sir, very well. I am ready to marry Monsieur Cavalcanti. But what are you up to? Ah, that is my affair. What advantage should I have over you if, knowing your secret, I were to tell you mine? Danglars bit his lips. Then, said he, you are ready to pay the official visits which are absolutely indispensable? Yes, replied Eugenie. And to sign the contract in 3 days? Yes. Then in my turn I also say, very well. Danglars pressed his daughter's hand in his, but extraordinary to relate, the father did not say, thank you, my child, nor did the daughter smile at her father. Is the conference ended? Asked Eugenie, rising. Danglars motioned that he had nothing more to say. 5 minutes afterwards, the piano resounded to the touch of Mademoiselle d'Armilly's fingers, and Mademoiselle Danglars was singing Brabantio's malediction on Desdemona. At the end of the piece, Etienne entered and announced to Eugenie that the horses were to the carriage, and that the Baroness was waiting for her to pay her visits. We have seen them at Villafort's. They proceeded then on their course. And now we begin volume 5 of the Count of Monte Cristo. We are in the home stretch. Chapter 96, The Contract. 3 days after the scene we have just described, namely towards 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day fixed for the signature of the contract between Mademoiselle Eugenie Danglars and Andrea Cavalcanti, whom the banker persisted in calling Prince, a fresh breeze was stirring the leaves in the little garden in front of the Count of Monte Cristo's house, and the Count was preparing to go out. While his horses were impatiently pawing the ground, held in by the coachman who had been seated a quarter of an hour on his box, the elegant phaeton with which we are familiar rapidly turned the angle of the entrance gate and cast out on the doorsteps Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, as decked up and gay as if he were going to marry a princess. He inquired after the Count with his usual familiarity, and ascending lightly to the first story, met him at the top of the stairs. The Count stopped on seeing the young man. As for Andrea, he was launched, and when he was once launched, nothing stopped him. "Ah, good morning, my dear Count," said he. "Ah, Monsieur Andrea," said the latter, with his half-jesting tone. How do you do? Charmingly, as you see. I am come to talk to you about 1,000 things. But first, tell me, were you going out or just returned? I was going out, sir. Then in order not to hinder you, I will get up with you, if you please, in your carriage, and Tom shall follow with my phaeton in tow. No, said the Count, with an imperceptible smile of contempt, for he had no wish to be seen in the young man's society. No, I prefer listening to you here, my dear Monsieur Andrea. We can chat better indoors, and there is no coachman to overhear our conversation. The Count returned to a small drawing-room on the first floor, sat down, and crossing his legs motioned to the young man to take a seat also. Andrea assumed his gayest manner. You know, my dear Count, said he, the ceremony is to take place this evening. At 9 o'clock the contract is to be signed at my father-in-law's. Ah, indeed, said Monte Cristo. What, is it news to you? Has not Monsieur Danglars informed you of the ceremony? Oh, yes, said the Count. I received a letter from him yesterday, but I do not think the hour was mentioned. And possibly my father-in-law trusted to its general notoriety. Well, said Monte Cristo, you are fortunate, Monsieur Cavalcanti. It is a most suitable alliance you are contracting, and Mademoiselle Danglars is a handsome girl. Yes, indeed she is, replied Cavalcanti in a very modest tone. Above all, she is very rich. At least, I believe so, said Monte Cristo. Very rich, do you think? Replied the young man. Doubtless. It is said Monsieur Danglars conceals at least half of his fortune. And he acknowledges 15 or 20 millions, said Andrea, with a look sparkling with joy. Without reckoning, added Monte Cristo, that he is on the eve of entering into a sort of speculation already in vogue in the United States and in England, but quite novel in France. Yes, yes, I know what you mean. The railway of which he has obtained the grant, is it not? Precisely. It is generally believed he will gain 10 millions by that affair. 10 millions! Do you think so? It is magnificent, said Cavalcanti, who was quite confounded at the metallic sound of these golden words. Without reckoning, replied Monte Cristo, that all his fortune will come to you, and justly too, since Mademoiselle Danglars is an only daughter. Besides, your own fortune, as your father assured me, is almost equal to that of your betrothed. But enough of money matters. Do you know, Monsieur Andrea, I think you have managed this affair rather skillfully. Not badly by any means, said the young man. I was born for a diplomatist. Well, you must become a diplomatist. Diplomacy, you know, is something that is not to be acquired. It is instinctive. Have you lost your heart? Indeed, I fear it, replied Andrea, in the tone in which he had heard Durante or Valère reply to Alceste at the Théâtre Français. Is your love returned? I suppose so, said Andrea with a triumphant smile, since I am accepted. But I must not forget one grand point. Which? That I have been singularly assisted. Nonsense. I have indeed. By circumstances? No, by you. By me. Not at all, Prince, said Monte Cristo, laying a marked stress on the title. What have I done for you? Are not your name, your social position, and your merit sufficient? No, said Andrea, no. It is useless for you to say so, Count. I maintain that the position of a man like you has done more than my name, my social position, and my merit. You are completely mistaken, sir, said Monte Cristo coldly, who felt the perfidious maneuver of the young man, and understood the bearing of his words. You only acquired my protection after the influence and fortune of your father had been ascertained. For, after all, who procured for me, who had never seen either you or your illustrious father, the pleasure of your acquaintance? Two of my good friends, Lord Wilmore and the Abbé Busoni. What encouraged me not to become your surety, but to patronize you? Your father's name, so well known in Italy and so highly honored. Personally, I do not know you. This calm tone and the perfect ease made Andrea feel that he was, for the moment, restrained by a more muscular hand than his own, and that the restraint could not be easily broken through. Oh, then, my father has really a very large fortune, Count? It appears so, sir, replied Monte Cristo. Do you know if the marriage settlement he promised me has come? I have been advised of it. But the 3 millions? The 3 millions are probably on the road. Then I shall really have them. Oh, well, said the Count, I do not think you have yet known the want of money. Andrea was so surprised that he pondered the matter for a moment. Then, arousing from his reverie, Now, sir, I have one request to make of you, which you will understand, even if it should be disagreeable to you. Proceed, said Monte Cristo. I have formed an acquaintance, thanks to my good fortune, with many noted persons, and have, at least for the moment, a crowd of friends. But marrying, as I am about to do, before all Paris, I ought to be supported by an illustrious name, and in the absence of the paternal hand, some powerful one ought to lead me to the altar. Now, my father is not coming to Paris, is he? He is old, covered with wounds, and suffers dreadfully, he says, in traveling. I understand. Well, I am come to ask a favor of you. Of me? Yes, of you. And pray, what may it be? Well, to take his part. Ah, my dear sir. What? After the varied relations I have had the happiness to sustain toward you, can it be that you know me so little as to ask such a thing? Ask me to lend you 500,000, and although such a loan is somewhat rare, on my honor you would annoy me less. Know then what I thought I had already told you, that in participation in this world's affairs, more especially in their moral aspects, the Count of Monte Cristo has never ceased to entertain the scruples and even the superstitions of the East. I, who have a seraglio at Cairo, one at Smyrna, and one at Constantinople, preside at a wedding? Never. Then you refuse me? Decidedly. And were you my son or my brother, I would refuse you in the same way. But what must be done? Said Andrea, disappointed. You said just now that you had 100 friends. Very true. But you introduced me at Monsieur Danglars'. Not at all. Let us recall the exact facts. You met him at a dinner party at my house, and you introduced yourself at his house. That is a totally different affair. Yes, but by my marriage, you have forwarded that. I? Not in the least. I beg you to believe. Recollect what I told you when you asked me to propose you. Oh, I never make matches, my dear prince. It is my settled principle. Andrea bit his lips. But at least you will be there. Will all Paris be there? Oh, certainly. Well, like all Paris, I shall be there too, said the Count. And will you sign the contract? I see no objection to that. My scruples do not go thus far. Well, since you will grant me no more, I must be content with what you give me. But one word more, Count. What is it? Advice. Be careful. Advice is worse than a service. Oh, you can give me this without compromising yourself. Tell me what it is. Is my wife's fortune 500,000 livres? That is the sum Monsieur Danglars himself announced. Must I receive it or leave it in the hands of the notary? That is the way such affairs are generally arranged when it is wished to do them stylishly. Your two solicitors appoint a meeting when the contract is signed, for the next or the following day. Then they exchange the two portions, for which they each give a receipt. Then, when the marriage is celebrated, they place the amount at your disposal as the chief member of the alliance. Because, said Andrea, with a certain ill-concealed uneasiness, I thought I heard my father-in-law say that he intended embarking our property in that famous railway affair of which you spoke just now. Well, replied Monte Cristo, it will be the way, everybody says, of trebling your fortune in 12 months. Baron Danglars is a good father and knows how to calculate. In that case, said Andrea, everything is all right, excepting your refusal, which quite grieves me. You must attribute it only to natural scruples under similar circumstances. Well, said Andrea, let it be as you wish. The evening, then, at 9 o'clock. Adieu till then. Notwithstanding a slight resistance on the part of Monte Cristo, whose lips turned pale, but who preserved his ceremonious smile, Andrea seized the Count's hand, pressed it, jumped into his phaeton, and disappeared. The 4 or 5 remaining hours before 9 o'clock arrived. Andrea employed in writing, paying visits, designed to induce those of whom he had spoken to appear at the banker's in their gayest equipages, dazzling them by promises of shares and schemes which have since turned every brain, and in which Danglars was just taking the initiative. In fact, at 8:30 in the evening, the grand salon, the gallery adjoining, and the 3 other drawing-rooms on the same floor were filled with a perfumed crowd who sympathized but little in the event, but who all participated in that love of being present wherever there is anything fresh to be seen. An academician would say that the entertainments of the fashionable world are collections of flowers which attract inconstant butterflies, famished bees, and buzzing drones. No one could deny that the rooms were splendidly illuminated. The light streamed forth on the gilt mouldings and the silk hangings, and all the bad taste of decorations, which had only their richness to boast of, shone in their splendor. Mademoiselle Eugenie was dressed with elegant simplicity in a figured white silk dress, and a white rose half concealed in her jet-black hair was her only ornament, unaccompanied by a single jewel. Her eyes, however, betrayed that perfect confidence which contradicted the girlish simplicity of this modest attire. Madame Danglars was chatting at a short distance with Debray, Beauchamp, and Château Renaud. Debray was admitted to the house for this grand ceremony, but on the same plane with everyone else, and without any particular privilege. Monsieur Danglars, surrounded by deputies and men connected with the revenue, was explaining a new theory of taxation which he intended to adopt when the course of events had compelled the government to call him into the ministry. Andrea, on whose arm hung one of the most consummate dandies of the opera, was explaining to him rather cleverly, since he was obliged to be bold to appear at ease, his future projects and the new luxuries he meant to introduce to Parisian fashions with his 175,000 livres per annum. The crowd moved to and fro in the rooms like an ebb and flow of turquoises, rubies, emeralds, opals, and diamonds. As usual, the oldest women were the most decorated, and the ugliest the most conspicuous. If there was a beautiful lily or a sweet rose, you had to search for it, concealed in some corner behind a mother with a turban or an aunt with a bird of paradise. At each moment, in the midst of the crowd, the buzzing and the laughter, the doorkeeper's voice was heard announcing some name well known in the financial department, respected in the army, or illustrious in the literary world, and which was acknowledged by a slight movement to the different groups. But for one whose privilege it was to agitate that ocean of human waves, how many were received with a look of indifference or a sneer of disdain! At the moment when the hand of the massive timepiece, representing Endymion asleep, pointed to 9 on its golden face, and the hammer, the faithful type of mechanical thought, struck 9 times, the name of the Count of Monte Cristo resounded in its turn, and as if by an electric shock all the assembly turned towards the door. The Count was dressed in black and with his habitual simplicity. His white waistcoat displayed his expansive, noble chest, and his black stock was singularly noticeable because of its contrast with the deadly paleness of his face. His only jewelry was a chain, so fine that the slender gold thread was scarcely perceptible on his white waistcoat. A circle was immediately formed around the door. The Count perceived at one glance Madame Danglars at one end of the drawing-room, Monsieur Danglars at the other, and Eugenie in front of him. He first advanced towards the Baroness, who was chatting with Madame de Villefort, who had come alone. Valentin being still an invalid, and without turning aside, so clear was the road left for him, he passed from the Baroness... Valentin still being an invalid. And without turning aside, so clear was the road left for him, he passed from the Baroness to Eugenie, whom he complimented in such rapid and measured tones that the proud artist was quite struck. Near her was Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who thanked the Count for the letters of introduction he had so kindly given her for Italy, which she intended immediately to make use of. On leaving these ladies, he found himself with Danglars, who had advanced to meet him. Having accomplished these 3 social duties, Monte Cristo stopped, looked around him with that expression peculiar to a certain class, which seems to say, "I have done my duty, now let others do theirs." Andrea, who was in an adjoining room, had shared in the sensation caused by the arrival of Monte Cristo, and now came forward to pay his respects to the Count. He found him completely surrounded. All were eager to speak to him, as is always the case with those whose words are few and weighty. The solicitors arrived at this moment and arranged their scrawled papers on a velvet cloth embroidered with gold, which covered the table prepared for the signature. It was a gilt table supported on lion's claws. One of the notaries sat down, the other remained standing. They were about to proceed to the reading of the contract, which half Paris assembled was to sign. All took their places, or rather the ladies formed a circle, while the gentlemen, more indifferent to the restraints of what Boileau calls the style énergique, commented on the feverish agitation of Andrea, on Monsieur Danglars' riveted attention, Eugenie's composure, and the light and sprightly manner in which the Baroness treated this important affair. The contract was read during a profound silence. But as soon as it was finished, the buzz was redoubled through all the drawing-rooms. The brilliant sums, the rolling millions which were to be at the command of the two young people, and which crowned the display of the wedding presents and the young lady's diamonds, which had been made in a room entirely appropriated for that purpose, had exercised to the full their delusions over the envious assembly. Mademoiselle Danglars' charms were heightened in the opinion of the young men, and for the moment seemed to outvie the sun in splendor. As for the ladies, it is needless to say that while they coveted the millions, they thought they did not need them for themselves, as they were beautiful enough without them. Andrea, surrounded by his friends, complimented, flattered, beginning to believe in the reality of his dream, was almost bewildered. The notary solemnly took the pen, flourished it above his head, and said, "Gentlemen, we are about to sign the contract." The Baron was to sign first, then the representative of Monsieur Cavalcanti, senior, then the Baroness, afterwards the future couple, as they are styled in the abominable phraseology of legal documents. The Baron took the pen and signed, then the representative. The Baroness approached, leaning on Madame de Villefort's arm. "My dear," said she, as she took the pen, "is it not vexatious? An unexpected incident in the affair of murder and theft at the Count of Monte Cristo's, in which he nearly fell a victim, deprives us of the pleasure of seeing Monsieur de Villefort." "Indeed," said Monsieur Danglars, in the same tone in which he would have said, "Oh well, what do I care?" "As a matter of fact," said Monte Cristo, approaching, "I am much afraid that I am the involuntary cause of his absence." "What? You, Count?" said Madame Danglars, signing. "If you are, take care, for I shall never forgive you." Andrea pricked up his ears. "But it is not my fault, as I shall endeavor to prove." Everyone listened eagerly. Monte Cristo, who so rarely opened his lips, was about to speak. "You remember," said the Count, during the most profound silence, "that the unhappy wretch who came to rob me dined at my house. You remember," said the Count, during the most profound silence, "that the unhappy wretch who came to rob me died at my house. The supposition is that he was stabbed by his accomplice on attempting to leave it." "Yes," said Danglars. "In order that his wounds might be examined, he was undressed, and his clothes were thrown into a corner, where the police picked them up, with the exception of the waistcoat, which they overlooked." Andrea turned pale and drew towards the door. He saw a cloud rising in the horizon, which appeared to forebode a coming storm. "Well, this waistcoat was discovered today, covered with blood, and with a hole over the heart. The ladies screamed, and 2 or 3 prepared to faint. It was brought to me. No one could guess what the dirty rag could be. I alone suspected that it was the waistcoat of the murdered man. My valet, in examining this mournful relic, felt a paper in the pocket and drew it out. It was a letter addressed to you, Baron." "To me?" cried Danglars. "Yes, indeed, to you. I succeeded in deciphering your name under the blood with which the letter was stained," replied Monte Cristo, amid the general outburst of amazement. "But," asked Madame Danglars, looking at her husband with uneasiness, "how could that prevent Monsieur de Villefort?" "In this simple way, madame," replied Monte Cristo. "The waistcoat and the letter were both what is termed circumstantial evidence. I therefore sent them to the king's attorney. You understand, my dear baron, that legal methods are the safest in criminal cases. It was perhaps some plot against you." Andrea looked steadily at Monte Cristo and disappeared in the second drawing-room. "Possibly," said Danglars. "Was not this murdered man an old galley slave?" Yes, replied the Count, a felon named Caderousse. Danglars turned slightly pale. Andrea reached the anteroom beyond the little drawing-room. "But go on signing," said Monte Cristo. "I perceive that my story has caused a general emotion, and I beg to apologize to you, Baroness, and to Mademoiselle Danglars." The Baroness, who had signed, returned the pen to the notary. "Prince Cavalcanti," said the latter. "Prince Cavalcanti, where are you?" "Andrea! Andrea!" repeated several young people, who were already on sufficiently intimate terms with him to call him by his Christian name. "Call the prince. Inform him that it is his turn to sign," cried Danglars to one of the floor-keepers. But at the same instant the crowd of guests rushed in alarm into the principal salon, as if some frightful monster had entered the apartments. Quorums quem deveret. There was indeed reason to retreat, to be alarmed, and to scream. An officer was placing 2 soldiers at the door of each drawing-room, and was advancing toward Danglars, preceded by a commissary of police, girded with his scarf. Madame Danglars uttered a scream and fainted. Danglars, who thought himself threatened, certain consciences are never calm. Danglars, even before his guests Danglars, who thought himself threatened, certain consciences are never calm. Danglars, even before his guests, showed a countenance of abject terror. "What is the matter, sir?" asked Monte Cristo, advancing to meet the commissioner. "Which of you gentlemen," asked the magistrate, without replying to the count, "answers to the name of Andrea Cavalcanti?" A cry of astonishment was heard from all parts of the room. They searched, they questioned. "But who then is Andrea Cavalcanti?" asked Danglars in amazement. "A galley slave, escaped from confinement at Toulon." "And what crime has he committed?" "He is accused," said the commissary, with his inflexible voice, "of having assassinated the man named Caderousse, his former companion in prison, at the moment he was making his escape from the house of the Count of Monte Cristo." Monte Cristo cast a rapid glance around him. Andrea was gone. Oh my goodness. So another wedding or betrothal before the wedding broken up by an arrest or a threatened arrest. This time it was Andrea Cavalcanti, revealed as the galley slave who had been imprisoned with Caderousse, who then later killed him. Oh my goodness. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you are having a wonderful, wonderful Labor Day. And I will see you again tomorrow for more reading. And please go ahead and start nominating what book you would like to read next after we finish our read-along together of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you have a great, great rest of your day. Bye.